It was a quiet little neighborhood, the kind where people smiled politely but rarely talked beyond a simple hello. Most families had lived there for years, and change wasn't something they welcomed easily. So when a new neighbor moved into the small blue house at the end of the street, it didn't go unnoticed. His name was Hank. He was older, with silver hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen more than he ever said. The limp in his walk was obvious, and the metal of his prosthetic leg sometimes showed beneath his jeans. Still, every morning without fail, he stood on his porch with a coffee in hand and nodded kindly to anyone who passed. Some neighbors responded with friendly waves. A few even struck up small conversations, but others, like Lisa, wanted nothing to do with him. Lisa lived in the house right next door. She was always in a rush, heels clicking on the driveway, phone glued to her ear, keys jingling in her hand. Her face rarely showed emotion, unless it was annoyance. To her, Hank was just another reminder of things she didn't want to deal with, and from the beginning she made it clear, she didn't like him. It was early morning, and the sky was heavy with clouds. Rain poured steadily, soaking the streets and tapping against rooftops like tiny drums. Hank stood at Lisa's front porch, holding a cardboard package in his hands. It was addressed to her, but the delivery driver had mistakenly left it at his door. Hank didn't mind. He simply wiped it dry and made his way next door to return it. He knocked gently, hoping she was home. A moment later, the door swung open. Lisa stood there, dressed in business clothes, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Her eyes dropped to the package in Hank's hands, then rose slowly to meet his face. For a split second, there was silence. "I think this was dropped at my place by," Hank began, his voice calm. Before he could finish, Lisa let out a sharp breath through her nose, narrowed her eyes, and slammed the door right in his face. The sound echoed down the street. Hank stood there for a moment, stunned. Rain dripped off the edge of his coat, soaking through to his shirt. He blinked slowly, looked down at the package still in his hands, then quietly set it on her welcome mat and turned to leave. From across the street, a couple of neighbors had witnessed the entire thing from their windows. One of them, Mrs. Dorsey, covered her mouth in shock. Another, a teenager named Caleb, frowned and shook his head, but no one said anything. No one wanted to get involved. Later that day, Lisa was overheard at the local coffee shop talking about the incident. She laughed as she told her friend, "He gives me the creeps. Always standing on that porch like he's watching everyone. I don't trust people like that." The friend laughed too, brushing it off. No one questioned her, no one defended Hank. And Hank? He said nothing, just went back to his porch, coffee in hand, nodding politely to every passerby, even the ones who looked the other way. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of Lisa slamming the door on Hank slowly faded from the neighborhood's daily routine. But Hank didn't change. He never spoke about the incident, or acted bitter. Instead, he kept living his quiet, steady life, showing kindness not with words but through actions. One cold morning, Maya, a single mother who lived a few houses down, found her old car refusing to start. She was late for work and nearly in tears, trying to keep her toddler calm in the back seat. Hank, who had been walking by with a bag of groceries, stopped without hesitation. He didn't say much, just gently offered to take a look. Within minutes, he was under the hood, tools in hand. An hour later, the car rumbled to life. Maya was stunned. She offered to pay him, but Hank simply smiled and waved it off. Another weekend, some neighborhood kids were playing outside when one of them tripped and scraped his knee. Hank brought out his old first aid kit, patched up the boy, and even gave them a box of old toys he had saved from when his nephews were little. The children beamed with joy, running off with their new treasures. When the first snowfall arrived, everyone woke to find their driveways buried under several inches of snow, but by mid-morning, the sidewalks and steps in front of Mrs. Dorsey's house, an elderly widow, were completely cleared. She hadn't asked anyone for help. But Hank had done it quietly, early in the morning, before most had even gotten out of bed. Slowly, people began to see Hank in a new light. He wasn't strange. He was kind-hearted, respectful, humble. He never asked for anything, he just gave again and again, but Lisa refused to see it. When she saw him out her window helping others, she rolled her eyes. "He's trying too hard," she muttered to a coworker on the phone. "It's weird, like he wants attention or something." Even as more neighbors started greeting Hank with smiles, Lisa kept her distance, never thanked him for the returned package, never made eye contact. To her he was still the strange man next door, and she had no idea how wrong she was. It was just past midnight, when the quiet street was shattered by the sound of screaming. Lisa's voice rang through the cold night, full of panic and desperation. "Help! Somebody help me, my baby's inside." Smoke poured out of her kitchen windows, flames danced across the roof, people stumbled out of their homes in pajamas and robes, eyes wide with shock. The orange glow from the fire lit up the street like a nightmare. Lisa was on her front lawn, barefoot, crying, her hands shaking as she pointed toward the second-floor window. "She's still in there, my daughter, she's upstairs." A few neighbors reached for their phones to call 911, while others stood frozen, helpless. The fire was spreading fast, the stairs inside were likely engulfed already. No one dared go near the house, no one except Hank. Without a word, he came rushing down his porch. He didn't have a jacket or helmet, just his flannel shirt, and the determination in his eyes. Someone shouted at him to stop, but Hank didn't slow down. He limped straight toward the flames, his metal leg clanking against the concrete. He disappeared into the house, swallowed by the thick smoke. Seconds ticked by like hours. Lisa sobbed uncontrollably, screaming her daughter's name over and over. Then finally, just when it seemed like too much time had passed, the front door burst open. Hank stumbled out, coughing hard, his face covered in ash and soot. In his arms was Lisa's daughter, wrapped in his shirt, crying but alive. Her tiny arms clung to him, like he was the only thing left in the world. The crowd gasped. Lisa ran forward, taking her daughter and falling to her knees in relief. Hank collapsed onto the lawn, gasping for air. His skin was red from burns, and his prosthetic leg had melted, the metal twisted and smoking. The paramedics arrived within minutes. They rushed Hank and the little girl to the hospital. Lisa sat in the back of the ambulance, still in shock. She held her daughter tightly, but her eyes never left Hank, his burned hands, his torn clothes, the pain in his face. For the first time, she truly saw him, not as a stranger, but as a hero. And it broke her heart that she hadn't seen it sooner. The hospital smelled like bleach and silence. Machines beeped softly in the background, and the air felt heavy. Lisa stood outside Hank's room, clutching a small bouquet of flowers she didn't even remember buying. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. She had barely slept since the fire. The image of Hank carrying her daughter through the smoke haunted her. The sound of the door slamming in his face weeks earlier echoed louder now than it ever had. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped inside. Hank lay in the hospital bed, his face bruised and bandaged, one arm resting in a sling. His leg was gone again. He would need a new prosthetic, more surgery, more pain. But when he saw Lisa, he managed a faint smile. Lisa couldn't hold it in. The flowers fell to the floor as she rushed to his side, her sobs bursting out. "I'm so sorry," she cried, gripping the rail of the bed. "I treated you so terribly. I didn't even know you, and I judged you. And then, you saved her. You didn't even hesitate." Hank's eyes softened, his voice was rough, but gentle. "She's safe, that's all that matters." That simple sentence broke her completely. She sank into the chair beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I never even asked your name properly. I never thanked you for bringing my package. I just assumed things. I was so wrong." A nurse, quietly checking Hank's chart, looked at Lisa with understanding. "He's always been like this," the nurse said softly. "Hank lost his leg overseas. He carried 2 wounded soldiers through gunfire to safety. They say he went back for a third, even after he was hit." Lisa's mouth dropped slightly. She stared at Hank, stunned. "You were a soldier?" Hank gave a slight nod. "A long time ago. I don't talk about it much." Lisa felt the weight of every word. All this time she had looked at him, and only seen what she wanted to see, what she feared, never who he really was. She looked at him again, but this time her eyes were filled with deep respect. "I was so wrong about you," she whispered. "So terribly wrong." After that night, something changed, not just in Lisa, but in the entire neighborhood. Lisa couldn't sit still, knowing the man who had saved her daughter was lying in a hospital bed, once again sacrificing his body for someone else. She started a fundraiser for Hank's medical bills, sharing the full story online. She didn't hold back. She admitted how she had judged him, how she had shut him out, and how he had rushed into fire to save her little girl without hesitation. The story spread quickly. Donations poured in from neighbors, friends, and even strangers from other towns. Within days, the fundraiser passed its goal. At the next neighborhood block gathering, Lisa stood in front of everyone, holding her daughter's hand. With tears in her eyes, she publicly apologized. "I misjudged a good man," she said. "I let fear and pride blind me. Hank is not only our neighbor, he's our hero." The crowd clapped, some cried, and when Hank returned home, walking slowly with a new prosthetic and a healing heart, he was greeted with cheers and open arms. The local veterans group honored him with a medal and a ceremony. Even the mayor came out to shake his hand. As for Lisa, she and her daughter began visiting Hank regularly. They brought him dinner, helped him around the house, and even spent holidays together. Her daughter called him Uncle Hank now, and he'd smile every time she said it. The man who once stood alone on his porch, nodded at people who looked away, was no longer invisible. The neighborhood finally saw him, not just as a veteran, not just as a survivor, but as the brave, kind, and selfless man he had always been. Months passed, and Hank became more than just a neighbor to Lisa, he became family. Sunday dinners, neighborhood walks, birthdays, he was always there, quiet and steady, just like always. One chilly afternoon, Lisa stopped by Hank's house while he was out picking up groceries. His door was unlocked. He had told her to come in any time. As she waited, her eyes drifted to a dusty old photo album, sitting on the coffee table. Curiosity got the best of her, and she gently opened it. Page after page showed glimpses of Hank's younger days, military uniforms, sunburnt smiles, moments frozen in time. Then her breath caught. One photo caught Lisa's attention more than the others. It showed Hank in his army gear, a younger version of him standing beside another soldier. The two men were smiling, their arms around each other, their faces covered in dirt, yet their eyes were bright. There was something about that image, something familiar, that made Lisa pause. Her heart skipped a beat. She squinted, trying to make sense of the feeling. As her eyes locked onto the face of the second soldier, her breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. It was her brother David. Her older brother, who had died during his deployment more than a decade ago. She hadn't seen that photo in years, and yet there he was, alive and smiling in a moment frozen in time. She stared at the picture, her heart racing, her hands shaking uncontrollably, as the weight of the realization sank in. David had been a hero, just like Hank. The memories of her brother flooded her mind, the way he used to laugh, the way he always promised to come home safe. She hadn't known much about his time in the military, never fully understanding the bond between soldiers. But now, as she looked at the photo, a truth she never expected slowly unraveled. Just then, Hank entered the room. His face softened when he saw what she was holding. Lisa didn't say a word at first. She just stared at the photo, the overwhelming mix of emotions threatening to spill over. Finally she found her voice, though it wavered with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice cracking. Hank looked at the photo, his eyes distant for a moment, as though the memories were pulling him back to another time. He nodded softly, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "David was one of the best men I ever knew," he said quietly, his voice rough with the weight of the past. "We were in the same unit. We fought side by side." His eyes flickered to the photo once more, and his lips tightened. "I tried to save him, but it was too late." The room felt suffocating in that moment. Lisa's heart ached for both of them, for David who had never made it home, and for Hank, who had carried that burden of guilt for years. She hadn't known this part of Hank's past, and it left her with a deeper understanding of the man sitting in front of her. The silence between them was heavy, but it was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, one of shared pain, sacrifice, and memories that would never fade. Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes as she stared at the photo, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she had just learned. The truth hit her like a wave, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. "You knew this whole time?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sorrow. Hank's eyes softened, his face lined with years of silent struggles. He took a deep breath before speaking, his voice calm and steady, but there was a certain sadness behind it. "I did," he said gently, his words carrying a weight of their own. But I didn't want to bring you more pain. I didn't want you to see me as anything but your neighbor." Lisa felt a lump form in her throat. She couldn't even find the words to respond. The silence between them hung heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. All she could think about was how she had judged him, treated him like an outsider, not knowing the truth. Hank wasn't just the man who had saved her daughter, he had saved her brother too, and that truth stung more than she ever expected. Without saying another word, Lisa walked out to the porch, feeling the cool evening air on her skin. She sat down beside Hank, their silence speaking volumes. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the neighborhood, but Lisa felt no warmth from it. Her mind was racing, her heart torn between guilt and gratitude. The weight of her past mistakes was almost too much to bear. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke the words that had been sitting heavy on her chest. "I judged the man who saved the most important people in my life, my daughter, and my brother." The moment hung between them, fragile and raw. Hank didn't respond with words, he didn't need to. Instead, he simply gave her a quiet smile, the kind of smile that carried years of understanding and forgiveness. And for Lisa, that smile was everything. It was all she needed to know. It was a moment of peace, a moment of healing. And for Lisa, it was a reminder that sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who never ask for anything in return. Thank you so much for watching the story of Hank, the quiet hero who showed us all the true meaning of kindness, sacrifice, and redemption. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes we need to look beyond the surface and really see the people around us. If you were moved by Hank's story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories, and share it with your friends to spread the message of compassion. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below and let us know what you think. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. We can't wait to bring you more incredible stories.